Well, good evening, everyone, or hello if you're watching the delayed broadcast during the day. My name's Lyle Shelton. It's my privilege to have with me my good friend George Christensen, MP, the member for Dawson in central North Queensland, member of the Liberal National Party. George, thanks very much for joining me on Macquarie Street.
Thanks very much, Lyle. Good to be with you here on your live show.
Thank you. Live and delayed for those who'll get the podcast on Friday. But for those who are watching tonight, you're in for something, in for a real treat, I think. George, I was really keen to get you on tonight because you've just released a podcast series yourself called Pandemic Unmasked, and you've got some very big names on it. I was listening to it 2 days ago on my run, your interview with Dr. Peter McCulloch. He's an internist, you can explain what that is, a cardiologist, I think I know what that is, and a epidemiologist, and he's had a lot to say about the responses to the pandemic based in the United States. He's a medical expert. But this podcast is causing quite a stir. George, give us a bit of the background to what's happened.
Well, firstly, the internist, I think it's internist is how you'd say it, and it just means a doctor of internal medicine. So that's what Peter is, along with all of the other stuff. He's actually one of the most extensively written doctors. Like, he's got papers galore that are out there, and yet he's being censored and sidelined and ridiculed, all because he has got some pretty firm views on the vaccines. He's also got some pretty firm views on treatments that have largely been suppressed, and it's not just hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. I probably said things that'll get you cancelled off Facebook.
I noticed on your podcast when I was listening to it, those words were blotted out with a bit of a scrunchy sort of a sound that obscured them.
Yes. Well, the full uncensored version is up. We did make two versions, one that was big tech friendly and the other one that was just the truth. And so, but isn't it sad in this day and age, which is exactly why I've made this podcast, that we've just got so censorious. And as you've pointed out, it's already come, up in headlights, the podcast, in a negative way, because the media have attacked it as peddling conspiracy theories, and Anthony Albanese's attacked it as being dangerous. Well, it's neither of those things, but their reaction is exactly why that I wanted to make this podcast, and I'm so pleased to see that it's just nudging outside of the top 10 news podcasts in Australia right now, and hopefully by the end of today it will be in the top 10, because the messages from Dr. McCulloch, the messages from Augusto Zimmerman, Professor of Law, the messages from Nikolai Petrovsky, who's an Australian vaccine developer, the messages from Dr. Robert Malone, who's already been widely heard on the Joe Rogan Experience, and so many others. They all need to be heard by the Australian public, because largely those messages are not getting through the mainstream media, Lyle.
No, that's exactly right. And I want to hasten to add that I'm not someone who's anti the COVID vaccine. You and I might have different views on that. But I listened to Joe Rogan interview Dr. Robert Malone last week. And this is this phenomenal 3-hour podcast. And look, I found it a very compelling discussion. It was absolutely gripping. This guy is Dr. Robert Malone
invented mRNA vaccines.
Invented the mRNA vaccine. He is certainly not a nutter. And of course, Dr. Peter McCulloch, who you just mentioned, who I listened to on your podcast, that was 2 half-hour versions. Now, these are big names internationally. Now, I'm not that concerned about who's right or who's wrong on the whole should we vax, should we not vax argument. But I think people should be allowed to have access to the information. And I found the information very compelling. And the fact that Robert Malone was kicked off Twitter just because it was announced that he was going on the Joe Rogan Experience, I just find that chilling. And the fact that Anthony Albanese and the ABC have attacked you today about having Dr. Peter McCulloch, whether you agree or not, what on earth is happening in our world, in this country?
Well, the interesting thing is the attack came because I raised the topic that Dr. Robert Malone raised with Joe Rogan, which was about mass formation psychosis. Now, actually, this interview that I did with Peter McCullough actually was done before that Joe Rogan podcast. And interestingly, the interview with Dr. Robert Malone that I did, that's going to air, I think, tomorrow on The Good Source, that was also done before his appearance on Joe Rogan. And we talked about that at length as well, because I'd heard about this theory, I guess you could say.
Just explain for our audience, what is mass formation psychosis? The ABC called it a conspiracy theory today. What is this thing the ABC is so concerned about?
Mate, ABC, just the fact that they call it a conspiracy theory. I see even the Australian, as conservative a newspaper that it is, they typified it as, I believe that our political leaders and media leaders have been hypnotised, and that's why they're putting in place all the policies that they are.
That's not what it is. No.
Not even close to being truth. I mean, and as for a conspiracy theory, go and have a look at some of the great names in psychology, whether it's Carl Jung or whether it's Gustave Le Bon, even some of the names outside of psychology that were in the field of public relations and the like. Merleau, there's many others that I could cite. Charles Mackay, he wrote the book on the madness of crowds. And so
that was Douglas Murray.
No, there was a book before that. Okay. I'm not saying the correct title, but sorry. So right. Charles Mackay wrote, this is many, many years ago, wrote a book called Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. So Douglas Murray's book was based on that on that original book.
But George, we've only got to look around to see mass formation psychosis in terms of people wearing masks, by themselves in a park outdoors, all sorts of irrational behaviour that this pandemic has caused in people. I mean, that's simply what Dr. Malone and others are referring to, surely.
That's correct. So this is, while I'm going through all that history, is that this is not a conspiracy theory. It's been established, this sort of pattern of behaviour. It explains why crowds, why societies even go mad. And it's been popularised during this pandemic by a professor out of Ghent University in Belgium by the name of Matthias Desmet. But he's just looked at what every other theorist on this phenomenon has written about, taken some pointers, applied it to what's going on right now, and said, "Whoa, we've got a whole heap of green lights here, guys." We've had people that have been isolated from each other. We've got everyone focusing on this common point of absolute fear. We've got people up there brandishing what they believe to be the only panacea to that point of fear. And what we've also got is the creation of the other, and that is anyone that is speaking against the narrative becomes the other, and anyone that refuses the solution to this point of fear definitely becomes the scapegoat. And it just meets all of the parameters. And so I think it explains a lot. If I don't think people have been hypnotized. I think that's a word that's probably just applied to explain to people how this can possibly happen. But they've been captured and conditioned, because if you hear only one side of the story through the mainstream media, through the political elite, through big tech, because everything else is being censored, well, you are going to join the chorus of fear as well. It's just surprising that people like you and I actually believe what we believe when we've been subjected to the same thing as most other people.
Well, George, the thing that struck me in listening to the 60 minutes of content you provided with Dr. McCullough and the 3 hours on the Joe Rogan Experience, and I'll really look forward to hearing your interview with Dr. Malone, which, as you say, was recorded before Joe Rogan. But the thing that interested me is neither of these men were anti the COVID vaccine or anti-COVID vaccine, But I think what they're saying is there are nuances in this debate. I mean, Dr. McCullough himself said that he thinks vulnerable people over the age of 65 should be vaccinated. He wasn't on your podcast spreading an anti-vax message. Dr. Malone wasn't spreading an anti-vax message. This has become a pejorative term, but what I heard them saying was giving nuances in this debate as medical experts and saying, look, this is what's happened in the pandemic. This has been the health response, and this is where we need further discussion and debate, whether it's on potential side effects, whether it's on whether the vaccines are as efficacious as what we were led to believe. All of these things, I think, need further discussion, particularly as we've reached, this point in the pandemic where Omicron has now come in. It's changing all the time, and yet we're not allowed to discuss the sort of things that you're discussing. Why is that? Give us your perspective as a member of Parliament. Why are we seeing this? Why can't your government allow discussion on these things? Don't they believe that we, the people, deserve to know or to have a nuanced debate?
Oh, look, I think, to be fair, that there has been those discussions that have happened within the government behind closed doors. But
and look, therein lies the problem, George. With respect.
Yeah, you're right. But rather than point the finger at one element of this, and that being the government, I'm going to talk more nationally or even globally. And you could say that that theory that I talked about explains quite a lot. It's like people believe that we are in a war and no one should talk against our side. And so, the ideas to tackle this pandemic were decided right at the beginning, and even after all the things that didn't eventuate, like all the predictions and the modelling out of the Imperial College in London, even after there were adverse events in vaccines like AstraZeneca, it was still, no, just plough straight ahead. We've just got to keep on going. Don't speak out. You're an anti-vaxxer. You don't want us to be saved. You want people to die. No one said that at all. No one said, we want people to die. But it is. I just can't help but think that if this was any other vaccine, any of them, to be quite honest, that are on the market right now in Australia, Lyle, if there were any other vaccine for any other virus, given the level of adverse events and the level of deaths reported, and I do say reported, not the ones that are officially done, but we've got ones that the TGA say, well, they're the official ones that we can establish a link. But I've got to tell you, that does not mean that the other deaths, that there is no link with the vaccine. It's just that
it's this whole causation versus correlation issue.
Yeah. So, and I actually wrote to the TGA and I asked these questions, so I know that what I'm saying is right. Any other vaccine would have been pulled off the market, I reckon. And I've asked many doctors that, and they said, well, absolutely. But forget safety, forget all of those issues, because we've just got to plough through and fix this problem. And that's,
George, is the counterpoint to that, though, that and this is where people like me have been prepared to, and I think probably most Australians actually have been willing to cut the government a bit of slack. Okay, we're in a pandemic. We've got this virus that's come out of a laboratory from the Chinese Communist Party. That was considered a conspiracy theory 12 months ago as well, but you'll just park that. You cut the government a bit of slack. We knew that Donald Trump developed the vaccines essentially in America, Operation Warp Speed. We knew that there was an experimental nature to it. The choice was take a vaccine that probably hadn't had all of the testing, or subject yourself to COVID, which also has all sorts of unknown risks for many people. Now we're into Omicron now, and it looks like it's petering out, and that's the great news. And let's hope that keeps on that trajectory. But going back 3 or 4 months before Omicron, you'd have to say it's a bit of a toss-up. Yes, there's some problems with the vaccines. We're hearing all this stuff, but there's also a lot of people getting really sick with COVID, and the risk of our hospital systems being overwhelmed. I mean, for me, that was probably the driver, okay, what was the alternative to preserving the hospital systems and saving lives to vaccination?
But I think that's been largely the narrative that we've just heard. And if we scratch the narrative and see what the facts are, they're two different things. Sure, at the very start of this pandemic, I was as worried as the next person about a large-scale outbreak that was going to lead to a lot of deaths, because that was the information that we were hearing. Now, it didn't eventuate. And in fact, very, very early in the piece, well before the vaccines were developed, an epidemiologist by the name of Dr. John Ioannidis had a paper published in none less than the World Health Organization Bulletin. And that paper looked at, I think it's called seroprevalence, so looking at analyses of blood to determine how widespread the COVID-19 actually was in the population, rather than just cases. So you have two different rates of measuring fatality from a virus: case fatality rate, which is just the number of cases, but it's always wrong really in determining what the true number is, because not everyone reports the cases. So they then go to a number of different measures, mainly looking at blood samples to determine infection fatality rate. Now, he determined that infection fatality rate, an average across, I think, about 50 or so countries from memory, and it was 0.27%. So, Lyle, when I told people that number, they got angry at me. They said, "Oh, you're spreading lies." And then I had it bookmarked on my phone to bring it up and show them, here it is, World Health Organization Bulletin. Look, this is the number. And when I would show them that, there would be disbelief for a few moments and then anger at the media, because people thought that if they caught COVID, there'd probably be a 50% chance, 40% chance, or something like that of dying. But to figure that there is a 0.27% chance of dying really puts this in in
And it does. But you're right, but it still would have. But there's still a prior to Omicron, there was still a significant risk of large numbers of people requiring treatment in intensive care units of our hospitals, and the whole idea behind the vaccination was to try and prevent that. Are you saying that was the wrong strategy?
I'm saying that we put all our eggs in one basket. And
yeah.
Guess what? That basket's got a lot of holes in it, because I see the virus spreading everywhere right now. We've just picked the lucky draw, I guess, in that, it's Omicron that we're dealing with here, which has an incredibly low fatality rate, much lower than 0.727.
Yeah.
I haven't seen what the IFR is on that, but it'd be much, much lower. So there are treatments that are out there, Lyle. I mean, even if I get past the IV one and the hydroxy one and all the rest of the ones that are contested, do you know that last year, I think it was back in August or September, the TGA actually approved a treatment in Australia for COVID-19 that will reduce hospitalisation and deaths by about 80%. Now, I don't know there's many people that actually know that. Yeah. And we bought only about 7,700 vials of it. Why haven't these treatments been rolled out more?
I agree with you on that. And one of the things, as someone who, is not anti the COVID vaccine, I have been annoyed at the suppression of discussion on these alternatives. And we've heard what happened in India and the like. But again, just playing devil's advocate a little bit, if you're Scott Morrison or Dominic Perrottet or Anastasia Palaszczuk, she's probably a bad example, but you try to deal with a public health emergency. There is a risk of your hospitals being overwhelmed. You've got to act quickly. And there's no doubt, that vaccinations do reduce the need for ICU, do keep people out of hospital. I don't think we dispute that. The question is, could there have been other measures taken in combination? As you say, did we put all the eggs in the one basket? And I think early on in the pandemic, you can cut governments a bit of slack, perhaps, for not doing that. But I guess the reason I'm interested in your podcast and Joe Rogan's is that I think we're further down the track now, and the time has gone well past you should never suppress discussion, but we've got to open up this debate more and more.
The reality of it is too, I talk about the basket, it's what's in the basket. If it was vaccines that were traditional vaccines, and yes, I accept that the developers of those vaccines have been slow, but doing a safe vaccine takes time. It can't be rushed, and the fact that we've had so many rushed, and mark my words, it will be found out down the track that there were lies and there were obfuscations by major vaccine manufacturers of mRNA vaccines that weren't told about to the TGA, or that perhaps even the TGA knew about but turned a blind eye to. And I hope like hell that there isn't long-term safety effects, because that is the one question that we do not know about, Lyle. We really don't know. And this is not George Christensen's opinion. I can pick up the documents in the TGA, the approval documents for both Pfizer and Moderna, and in the delegates' approval, it actually says in there what are the deficiencies. And one of the key deficiencies highlighted in both Pfizer and Moderna's approval was the lack of long-term safety data. Of course, there can't be any long-term safety data because the thing's only been developed. And so you go from there to, well, we're going to force everyone into getting vaccinated. Now, I'm sorry that I really actually don't need a reason to say to anyone, I don't want that substance injected into me. But alone just saying that there's no long-term safety data and I want to be sure about long-term safety data, that should be a valid reason enough. But yet people have been sacked from their jobs. People have been now excluded from polite society. And guess what? The head of Pfizer's come out today and said 2 doses does absolutely nothing against Omicron. And 2 doses will probably do absolutely, in fact, probably 3 doses will do nothing against the next variant. And perhaps 4 doses will do nothing against the one after that. So what's the difference? I mean, I'm happy to say I'm not jabbed. You've probably had 2 jabs, right? Well,
I have. Yeah, I've had 2. Yeah, and by the way, George, I got Omicron at Christmas time. The vaccine didn't stop me from getting Omicron, and I had a mate who was unjabbed, same age as me, similar sort of physique and health characteristics. His symptoms were probably slightly more severe than mine, but nothing that you couldn't deal with.
If you hadn't have developed Omicron, you've now got something called natural immunity, and I think that's going to be long lasting, actually.
Well, I guess we don't know. Will it? I mean, people have had COVID on more than one occasion, I've heard. I guess the reason I say that is because I still think there's a lot we don't know.
There is a lot we don't know, but it's sort of, I think that in general, you will find that most physicians would suggest that you are protected from severe reoccurrences of COVID-19 of the variants that currently exist. New variants could pose an issue. But guess what? As variants develop in the main, and I was just speaking to, I won't name names, but I was speaking to someone senior in the government about this, and they absolutely concurred with me that as variants develop, the usual thing is they weaken. So I think you're right. I think the pandemic's over. I think that Omicron's just doing its job at building up natural immunity. But the crazy thing is we still have all these restrictions. And Pfizer said today someone double jabbed has no protection, nothing. There's no difference between that person and me. But yet, if I was a health worker, I'd be out of a job. They wouldn't. And right now, I can't go into a restaurant and the other person can. So there's no logic behind that. And given that we know that's fact now, I mean, the bloody manufacturer's saying it, then there's no reason to continue it on. But as much as you and
George,
I, and everyone,
why aren't your colleagues up in arms? This is the problem. This is why I wanted to have you on, and why I want to point people to your podcast, and if they're really keen, go and watch Joe Rogan's as well. Because you'll get a nuanced discussion. It's not conspiracy theories. You may not, you don't have to agree with everything that Dr. Malone or Dr. McCullough or the other guests that you have say, but it's a sensible, intelligent debate. It's not conspiracy theory, as Anthony Albanese and the ABC are trying to point out. And my concern is, George, why in our federal parliament, where you've sat for the last 10 or more years, why can't politicians help lead the nation in a nuanced debate? Why are we treated this way, and why do politicians from a conservative side of politics contribute to the cancel culture that happens? I know I'm dropping you in it there, but I just think our audience want to know.
I don't want to let them off the hook, but I don't want to give extra reasons for people to come at me. But what I'll say is this, in answering your question in a roundabout way, politics is downstream of culture. Our cultural institutions, one of the very big ones is the media. And look at the Novak Djokovic debacle. That was entirely and utterly media-driven. Clickbait news that led to a decision, whether you want to say it was good or bad. Again, the courts actually ruled that it was a bad decision, so that's the independent umpire there, and away we go. And that's been the whole system. That's how everything has been, and everything has played out in this pandemic. I think that it's largely been driven by headlines, and it's very sad. But Lyle, can I just say one thing? I mean, me and you and so many other people know that with Omicron, it means the pandemic is petering out. But yet we have Gunner up in the Northern Territory saying that the vaccinated have to stay and unvaccinated have to stay.
It's outrageous. It's outrageous.
Even for work. Over in WA, they're going absolutely mad over there. I mean, the Premier over there is basically wanting to cede the state from the rest of Australia, kick everyone out, and says he's going to make life hell for the unvaccinated. Same over in France. Macron said he wanted to ping him off. He said a different word to that. But I mean...
Yet Macron's happy to have Novak Djokovic play in the French Open, unlike Australia. But there's an irony for you. George, we're probably going to have to wind this up. I know you've had a massively busy day, and I really want to say thanks so much for giving your time. Tell people, George, where they can go to access your interviews with Dr. McCullough and the one with Dr. Malone, which is going to drop, I think you said tomorrow. So for those who are listening to this on Friday, that will have been yesterday. But where can people go to access that content?
So you can go to Apple Podcasts, you just type in Conservative One, Pandemic Unmasked. I think if you even just type in Conservative One, it'll come up. But it's on all those platforms. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud. And if you want to look at it in video form, the easiest way is to go to www.goodsource.news, and you'll see the video form there. David Pello, who runs the Good Source platform, who you and I know, Lyle, has done a very good job in producing these podcasts, and so he's running them in his platform. Fantastic.
He's providing a great service, and of course the edited version of this talk will be with my Macquarie Street political podcast, which will drop on Friday. But George, thank you so much again for your time. Thank you for what you're doing for free speech and free debate, whether people agree or not. It's important we have the discussion, and I get really disturbed with the persecution that you cop in the media, and that's another reason why I wanted to have you tonight. So thanks so much, George, and we'll look forward to chatting again sometime soon.
See you later from tropical North Queensland, mate.
Good night all.